Tom Cruise looks like his own Madame Tussauds version of himself, which is to say that he is timeless.
Welcome to Crash, the tech podcast about everything else. Today, that means being the moral arbiter of the future of everything, the big questions about whether technology and social media is good or evil, and why the cure for cancer might end up being found in space. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokell-Walker, lamenting KLM for missing my connection, having to spend 6.5 hours in Schiphol on the way back from MWC.
So, Chris, do you want to know something? How about how Crash has made it into the public ether?
Have we crossed the top 100 podcast list?
No, we haven't. Shut up. No, we're on our way. But a journalist dropped into my DMs on LinkedIn offering to interview me about Crash and about how great Crash was, which was very exciting. They'll remain nameless, but they offered to push out the interview on all the sorts of social platforms. It was going to be really exciting. It's going to be on Spotify, it's going to be Amazon Music, if I paid them £99. I was like, what?
Have you seen that actually this is not just a thing in terms of scamming for pay for play coverage of podcasts, but also there is this weird thing going on where there's like a Twitter account takeover happening where people get DM'd by supposedly a TechCrunch reporter and then they have to fill out a calendar invite that includes their details, and then that somehow gives the hacker access to their account. It's actually kind of petrifying.
I'd forgotten that it's a key part of like Forbes' business model and charging for publication, but I haven't experienced it recently about someone really wanting me to pay them to talk about me, which is really odd. One thing that shows us how far we've got to go, about an hour after we recorded the last episode, Apple, after us making jokes about how Apple weren't really going to announce anything, which you didn't listen to because we might have removed it, don't tell anybody. An hour, we were sort of briefly taking the mick out of Apple for not really doing anything. Apple then announced the entire world and threatened to change the industry and do all of this sort of stuff. So have you seen the sort of new cheap Mac, and do you care?
I don't care because I don't really like Macs, though. So I am in the market for a PC that can run, or like a computer that can run a local LLM. This does not fit that bill because
that's not that.
No, it's definitely not this. But I do see it becoming really useful and interesting for people who want to dabble in Macs but can't afford it. The question that I have always with this sort of stuff is it not just like a Mac Chromebook? Like, is it actually going to be, oh, great, I want to try a Mac, and then it kind of salts the earth for anybody who wants to then evolve into the Mac ecosystem because they go, well, it's so rubbish and so underpowered that it doesn't make any difference to me.
My hunch is, so for those who haven't seen it, it's either £600 or £700 MacBook that is in silly colours to make it sound like it's cool or young. And it's sort of the baseline of what an Apple MacBook could be. What I see it as, it's a little bit like the medium coffee. No one ever orders a medium coffee. They always go large because of the price difference. And I was looking at the spec difference and the price difference between the MacBook Air, which is about £1,100, and this, which was £700. And it just smashes it out the water. So I was like, I reckon I could justify £700 for this MacBook. You look through the specs and fuck it, I'll just buy a MacBook Air. And then actually they've made me do what they want me to do, and that's annoying and I hate it. But yeah, we missed it by like an hour.
That is always going to happen. As I said to you when you WhatsApped me about this, news will constantly occur, and so it's not possible to constantly be on top of it.
And that's why this week we've chosen to avoid the news and talk about deep philosophical issues. We'll move on to our main story. And this isn't really a main story more than it is to roll out questions to which there are no answers to across an entire episode. And the questions are simple. So, is social media a good thing or a bad thing? But the answers are, of course, fought academically, rhetorically, and geopolitically across the world. With Crashed, of course, unless you're brand new, today's guest has brought you to us, you'll know we're keen on detail, nuance, and trying to avoid polarised, populist, and simple answers, unless the answer is really simple. But that's why we're really pleased to have our guest, Taylor Lorenz. Only last week, a comment under one of her stories said that she was one of a very small number of people to be trusted about theories of the internet, and her work places her, in my view, as one of the most important voices globally on internet culture, digital regulation, and the everyday things actually happening online, of course, alongside Chris. So she's a technology journalist, editor of the tech and online culture newsletter User Mag, author of the book Extremely Online, capable of moving an entire news agendas with her work, and seemingly, not seemingly, definitely, but seemingly as a caveat, a lightning rod for the alt-right for reasons that I don't fully understand, except for the fact that you're a woman with an opinion. Taylor, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you for hyping me up.
I mean, all of that's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all true.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll go with that. The random commenter that said that, my mother.
I think it was someone, I think it was actually a journalist who said it, or someone who actually had a rep, but I couldn't go back and
All
find
right,
the
all
comment. I
right.
just remember reading it.
I'm sure it was a very esteemed personality. We'll just assume.
Look, below the line is an equally valid form of the internet. So I was tempted to just start with the big question. Is social media a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's like being like, is media a good thing or a bad thing? It doesn't. That's not a.
So then we will go into the details. So you've written a Guardian column about how plans to ban children from social media are ushering in an era of mass surveillance and widespread censorship. Widespread censorship contributing to what scholars have called a global free speech recession. And you've questioned whether algorithms are destroying the internet, though actually from your YouTube video from this morning, it feels like you're pro-algorithm and actually not much has changed.
I just want to say with algorithms, people have like, it's like this big scary word. Algorithms aren't inherently bad. Algorithms are used for search, to help us find things that we need. Algorithms are used to filter out scams and spam. So I think like the question is how are we building these algorithms and what are they incentivizing? And are they built, to maximize profit, or are they built to maximize, positive user experience?
And where have they gone wrong then? Is there an example of a really good algorithm or like a point at which they've kind of been led astray, or a company that has led them astray? I was listening to a radio program today on my walk back from teaching at the university, and I heard someone lambasting the engagement that we have in the UK about this. Will we or will we not ban social media? And basically someone saying that they don't think that we should ban all of social media, except that they only think WhatsApp is okay and everything else is not. And WhatsApp is not a social media platform, first off. But anyway, and they were just basically saying TikTok's algorithm is terrible. All of these things are terrible. Like, is there a kind of an example of where we've been dragged away from the good algorithms into a more kind of nefarious place?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, TikTok is an example of a good algorithm. I think a lot of people would disagree and say that the reason TikTok has such a competitive advantage over something like Instagram is because of the algorithm. I think a lot of people feel bad after using social media, and often that's because they're being confronted with negative information, or it's content that's sort of perfectly tailored to keep them engaged, right? To keep them sort of watching and consuming ads and stuff. And that doesn't feel good when you finally log off 7 hours later of your TikTok binge or whatever. And that is because algorithms currently, most of these social media content recommendation algorithms, because I don't think people have problems with search algorithms and other things as much. These content recommendation algorithms are optimized for profit and engagement above all else. And that is why I think they're bad. And I would argue that instead of trying to regulate speech, which ultimately happens when you regulate algorithms, we should pass data privacy laws, which Europe, by the way, used to be in favor of before, the past year or so that these tech companies don't have the ability to target us. And we should advocate for, consumer choices and more options. For instance, like there are a bunch of social media platforms where you can opt into different algorithms or different feeds, and you can have that choice. Maybe one day you do want to see hyper engaging content. Maybe some days you want to subscribe to a different algorithm, but giving consumers more choice, I think, and autonomy over their online experience is good.
But is there that paradox of choice where actually there are, so same as Instagram did have that feature where you could do it like reverse chronological, and they went back to that even though no one was really for it.
Well, no one used it. No one used it because it's fundamentally a really bad experience. Reverse chron, this is one thing I have to say about reverse chron, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I miss the internet when it was reverse chron. But reverse chron feeds are way more easier to manipulate because it's only time. So like they're full of spam. They're full of often like disinformation because again, it hasn't been filtered. So it's like, it's actually not a better system to go back to reverse chron. I think when people talk about that, they're really just nostalgic for the early internet before it was so profit driven. Because if we just took the internet today that is hyper profit driven and like made it all reverse cron, I don't think that would be a much better internet.
Particularly with AI bots, right? Like you'd have
Yes,
agentic AI would just be like you just have someone
Yes.
churning out. It'd be the slopification of the internet gone wild, no?
But I think it's all in the context of these social media bans, which I think are deranged and bad.
I think we'll get into the ban in a minute, but like when it comes to those algorithms, they can be manipulated. There was that that big investigative piece on the TikTok algorithm that showed there was that button that you could push that somehow made something go viral. And then that instantly, from that one example, that instantly led a lot of the perhaps less rigorous media to jump on it and go, right, that means obviously that China is somehow making us all turn communist. And how clear a risk is algorithmic misrepresentation or manipulation, or is it all just a figment that no one has full control of that anymore, or does TikTok still have that power?
That power was never used for anything other than boosting someone like Charlie D'Amelio. Like, it was not like used as far as any evidence that has come out so far, to push Chinese propaganda. And Chris wrote the book on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have that like evidence. I think again, like I think that these algorithmic systems all, value different things and they evolve over time. I would love more transparency, but I think it's just really bad for these lawmakers to come in and say, well, here's what I think the algorithm should promote and here's what it shouldn't promote. Like, for instance, Donald Trump is currently saying that, the algorithms need to promote patriotic content, and our FCC wants cable companies to air patriotic content all summer because it's the 250th anniversary of America. I don't think we want to give the government the power. I think we need to, again, regulate these profit systems instead of trying to do tweaks to different algorithms.
The ultimate irony in that, by the way, is that if Donald Trump wants to do that, that is exactly the risk and the problem that is identified with the Chinese version of TikTok with Douyin, which is that they literally have a positive energy tab, which is disbanded by the Chinese government to say that you must pump out state-performing propaganda here. So, like, it's bizarre that in trying to fight these sorts of things, we are often just replicating them.
A question to both of you then is, does the sort of the Trumpification of TikTok, or however that ownership model works itself out in practice, is that more of a risk? Or is that just conspiracy theory and the algorithm will be algorithmic? The algorithm will be algorithming. Try say that 3 times quick.
Well, they said, at inauguration, TikTok had a huge party and they invited all of these people that were previously banned for election misinformation. And they were telling them, don't worry, we're going to get you back on. And they have since been reinstated. And I think we're already seeing, like, they didn't just force that sale for nothing. They're forcing that sale because they want to influence the app and leverage the app. They want American supremacy through tech companies. And I think actually Europe is sort of learning this now, and Europe is trying to do all these weird things of like, wait, maybe we're going to make European social media, but they're trying to like exert power over American tech, like through their like Europe laws. But America is very much like, no, we want control over this like global tech landscape. And so we need to control TikTok, even though it's technically, we just have TikTok US. They ultimately want to like influence the whole. Just so funny, because I just have to say, as somebody that reported on TikTok, it's like, it didn't have to sell to ByteDance. They didn't have it. Like Viacom, which is an American company, wanted to buy it as well, as I'm sure Chris knows. And, the government could have gotten involved back in 2017 when TikTok was Musical.ly was what it was called, was on the come up. And they didn't care until people started to use the app to criticize Trump or, criticize the war in the Middle East and stuff like that.
There is a misunderstanding of how algorithms work, and an attempt to try and pin on them all of society's ills, where actually it's not that, right? It's humans' response to algorithmic signals. That is the thing that is concerning. I remember writing 8 years ago a story for The Economist about folks who would like get up close to the edge of cliff edges in India and ended up falling off them because they were trying to grab attention by having kind of outrageous content and like eye-opening content. Now, of course, you just have that with AI. You just spin up basically an AI backdrop and you'd solve that problem immediately. You wouldn't have to risk your life. But people were kind of dying for these sorts of things. Like we saw even in the days of YouTubers shooting each other while holding Bibles in front of themselves, thinking that would stop a bullet. Like it's not. There is this attempt, I think, because we have like such a shift in how we live now with the arrival of social media platforms that are driven by algorithms, to try and pin the problems of them on the algorithms, whereas actually it is the human response to the algorithms, right? And my favorite analogy is that social media platforms are funhouse mirrors. They amplify and kind of aggressively spin out the worst bits of us and sort of tuck in and remove the best bits of us. To me, the fundamental problem is that we need to sort out the society issue rather than the algorithmic issue. And that's the big thing. Do you find, Taylor, that that social media platforms or just generally any kind of algorithm struggles to pin you down? Because I feel like this is a common journalist problem, right? Is that we have such diverse areas that actually, if you look at like the ad transparency section on Google, has no idea who I am or what I'm interested in or what I'm doing, just because you search for so much random stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I just did a story for Vanity Fair on Epstein and TikTok and sort of the way that people were using basically breaking apart the files on TikTok. And so I was watching all these Epstein videos and messaging people about them. And now I'm getting all this Epstein stuff that I don't care about. And I'm like, get me back to what I was before. But yeah, I mean, I think like I do support, I do think a lot of people feel, like you said, Chris, it's like the algorithm is sort of a reflection of them. Maybe they don't like what they see from it. Or like, I mean, algorithms are just sort of like delivering them news that they don't like. Like the world is really bleak and dark right now. And so much of the way people feel about social media is really just sort of how they feel about the news that they're learning about on social media. And so I think there's that sort of conflation as well.
So far, algorithms, good.
Yeah. Well, algorithms are just sorting content, which we want to do. We do want to sort content. Like Chris said, like reverse chronological feeds are full of more misinformation, more disinformation, more spam, more scams. And so that we don't want to just go down this road policing speech. I think we need algorithmic transparency. I think we need data privacy, things like that. But we don't want, some 85-year-old in Congress deciding, what the algorithm can show everyone. Like it has to be patriotic. That's literally like China.
So scary. And the algorithms, at least from my research, appear to be the TikTokification of everything. So we all know that where Reels came from. We all know where Instagram's recommendations feeds coming from. And we'll exclude X from this because X's algorithm just doesn't make any sense to anybody because they haven't invested it in the same way. Is that TikTokification and the sort of removal of this follower count as a measure of success? That to me feels like a really exciting time for creators and a really exciting time for people to get involved because you don't have to spend 2 years to get a viral hit to build up that follower base.
But that's also negative for creators because they don't get the consistency. So you can no longer count the people that opt into seeing your content are going to see that content.
But then that comes into user funneling. So I don't think any social media could ever really create a loyal audience, but you could turn them into your Substack. You can move them into your email subscriber list. So the whole like marketing 101, aggressively boring user funneling that I've spent too long researching. How many videos does it take for someone to watch before they subscribe to your newsletter or willing to give you an email address? Chances are it's either, depending on the quality of content, it's either 3, 7 or 21. But again, the idea that you can have a number for that as a catch-all is so obviously factually wrong. So it's like really, really broad brush. How do we get onto that? Anyway, yes. So away from the algorithms, is it a campaign or is it just reporting on the sort of Section 230 and trying to make sure that it maintains?
Well, I personally believe that we should keep Section 230 because it's a very important law in America. We don't have the same sort of libel laws. We have a very different sort of free speech structure than the rest of the world, for better or worse. So Section 230 is this very important law that I report a lot on and also believe that we should keep. And so I'm doing, this mini series kind of explaining how it works and why we should protect it. It's sort of become a boogeyman for a lot of people.
If you happen to not be so across US policy, which why would you be? It's known as the 26 words that created the internet, and the 26 words are: no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And so essentially it means that digital providers like Meta's Facebook or Instagram or Elon Musk's Twitter, it's not X, cannot be held liable for things published by third parties. And so there isn't a direct UK equivalent, though the Online Safety Act focuses on duty of care and regulation and platforms assessing risks from content, but it's not quite the same thing. But so far, at least, Section 230 has protected globally against the sort of censorship of free speech to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, so a lot of people get this wrong and they hear this like sort of basic description of Section 230 and they hear tech platforms aren't liable for XYZ. And that makes them angry because they think, well, tech platforms should be liable for everything. We hate them. They're bad. They're evil. Da, da, da. But that's not really what's happening here. There is no public space on the internet. There is no such thing as the internet is a like, it's not like the physical world, right? So you have to have a company or an organization or a person go in and set up a space. That space could be a website with a comment section. That space could be a massive social media network. That space could be, a forum, whatever. What Section 230 says is that you, the user, will be held liable for your own speech, not the person who set up the space or operates this space. And that's really important, because if you were to hold the purveyors of the people that set up the space on the internet responsible for all the speech that happens on them, that would make a platform like Yelp responsible for every single review that is put on Yelp. They wouldn't allow anything negative that's legally, dicey. So you wouldn't be able to leave a negative restaurant review. You wouldn't be able to critique anyone in power. They wouldn't be able to make sort of good faith moderation decisions. It would be really bad. But I think people are in such a crazy frenzy that they just think that they've been sort of convinced that, like, repealing Section 230 is somehow going to, quote unquote, hold big tech accountable. In fact, Meta in recent years has been lobbying for repealing Section 230 because they actually don't need it anymore now with AI. The big social platforms are like, actually, with AI, we do have the ability to pre-screen and pre-censor every piece of content, and we don't really need we can moderate at that scale and it won't really affect us that much. And it would actually shut down every one of our competitors because they're smaller. So we could consolidate power.
That's horrifying. That's really scary that they could do that. I mean, so let's go into like a sci-fi world where actually this was repealed, where actually the folks who are fighting against 230 managed to succeed. What are the consequences of that, do you think?
Well, we have an internet that is very similar to China. And I hate, like, every time I do this, because I have a lot of, I am on the left. Okay. I know China's amazing. Everyone has housing and healthcare and everything. But we have to be able to criticize China. Every time I try, people in the YouTube comments are like, China. Like, there's actually a lot of bad stuff about China. I would argue their internet policies are pretty authoritarian. So I feel like I have to put this disclosure because people are real China boosters lately.
Does the American left love China?
They love China. Yes. Oh my God, have you not heard of China
Jeremy
Maxing?
Corbyn.
Oh, it's a huge
thing. I know
of
China Maxing, but
they're like so pro-China, it's not even funny. Yes, I have like multiple friends planning to move to China. Yes, everybody is like on this China kick. I don't know what's happening, but it's like
You have multiple friends planning to move to China. Tell us more about that.
I was obsessed with China. I was literally at a party recently. I think it's because America is like truly crumbling and China has always been like, at least in our recent sort of lifetime, like especially in the past 10 years, China has been like positioned as this insane boogeyman. It is not because of TikTok, but it is funny that like everything backfired so bad because they were like, China's propagandizing us. And that made people kind of look into China and like start to go on Red Note. There was that trend to join Red Note like after the election and stuff. And so I do think just like more of the American left is like, wait a minute, China's actually really great and they have healthcare. And so what if we have surveillance, drones all over? We have that here in America too.
There are other places to get state-sponsored healthcare. They could London Max rather than China Max. They should do this. This is what we want. They can London Max.
I know.
Americans,
we could live
some of the few types of immigrants that the UK still is really enthusiastic about. So yeah, do it.
I feel like I have to give this like disclosure now because of the way people feel about China. But long story short, there Saudi Arabia, Iran to some extent, like there are these countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, that have like stricter control over speech online, Sri Lanka, and they've mostly passed these all under the guise of online safety. It would be really bad. But yeah, to answer your point, Chris, like we wouldn't have free speech anymore online. Everything would have to be pre-censored through AI to ensure not to, criticize anybody in power that might take issue.
And is that just because of a liability thing, right? Because at the minute, 230 gives them a shield, gives them protection, whether you think rightly or wrongly, against liability for anything that any user says on their platform.
Yeah, and they're already liable for a bunch. Like they're already liable for anything criminal, like they can be held accountable for criminal content or CSAM or any sort of illegal content they're certainly liable for. And if you think that definition of illegal content should be expanded, I encourage you to lobby for that. But like That is a very different pathway than what they're trying to do. Also, we have done a huge carve out to Section 230 actually in 2018. So we had all of these same discussions in the 2010s with the rise of algorithmic feeds and all this sort of social media panic and stuff. And in 2018, at the beginning of the techlash, when all these liberals were like, "Oh, Donald Trump is president because of Facebook. Da da da. We have to regulate big tech. But we have to eliminate Section 230." They did pass FOSTA SESTA, which was the first major carve out. It was actually an amendment to Section 230 that said that basically platforms are liable for content that could, quote, encourage sex trafficking, right? So it was like, this was at the height of like the QAnon stuff. And, I don't know, people were like, oh, we're going to crack down on sex trafficking. We're going to prevent the children from being sex trafficked. What that law did is actually end up removing vast swaths of LGBTQ content, reproductive justice content, was all removed. Websites were shut down, forums shut down. It was devastating. We know the effect of it now. It did not actually lead to even one arrest of any sort of sex trafficking. Like, it didn't lead to one example of prosecution at all. What these companies did is they just began mass censoring anything that, was too sexual, basically. And that's what also contributed to Tumblr shutting down, because Tumblr had to banned porn in reaction to this, and then the platform cratered.
So we cover that. So if you want to understand more about that, there's an entire episode with Maeve Joy and Carolina R.A. and that published, of course, off the top of my head, not like I made a note about this before we started, from the 27th of November. The counter argument. So I know that you've argued with Scott Galloway of the Pivot podcast about the sort of section.
Delusional man. Well, he just doesn't have any. If you have no tether to reality and you want to lie and make things up, then you can say whatever you want, which is what he seems to be doing. I don't even know what he's been saying in Section 230. I feel like he's mostly ranting about women, who are, of course, the problem in society for these, young men.
I can see you have a clear view. Galloway on 230 is quite clear that he thinks that removing it is a good thing and will hold social media platforms to account. That's his. It's slightly more nuanced than that, but that's the broad brush of his approach.
It doesn't, by making Meta more powerful. What's so crazy is they did, I don't know if you guys remember, they had a huge campaign in America in 2017, 2018 to repeal Section 230. They had Amy Schumer, they had Seth Meyers, they had like all these celebrities get involved. This was like a huge, I feel like I'm like a goldfish where I'm like, doesn't anyone remember? Like, this was literally 10 years ago. We're living in like a time warp where we just do this over and over again. This was a huge thing. And this was everything they argued. There's Amy Schumer is like holding a sign that says like amend Section 230 and like they're like hold big tech accountable. What we made this huge carve out, an unprecedented carve out to Section 230 that like it's the biggest sort of like way that we've chipped away at this law ever. And what I would say to those people, are Meta and Google more or less powerful today than they were in 2018, the last time that we chipped away into Section 230. And since then, Mark Zuckerberg has testified that he wants Section 230 removed, produced a white paper. His head of product is advocating for it now. With AI, they literally do not care if Section 230 is removed because they don't rely on free speech to have a successful business model. They rely on data harvesting and ad targeting and stuff. And look at these massive companies in China. They don't rely on free speech to be profitable. They're eventually, they can just be deputized by the government as censors. They can censor in the way the government likes to get a friendly regulatory environment, and they can continue to profit and profit and profit. And I'm sure that's what Galloway loves, because he loves corporate profits. That's all he does is defend these like ghoulish, corporate profiteers and reactionaries.
On that note, we will be back in 1 minute and actually get into the sort of, we're going to talk about mental health. We'll be back in 1 second. Welcome back. We're going to try and segue from a conversation that we're having in the break and a conversation that we were having before about just how damaging or not damaging or circumstantial social media is for your mental health. And it turns out mentioning Scott Galloway might not be good for Taylor's mental health. But essentially, there is a lot of rumor and there is a lot of academies and there is a lot of nonsense and there is a lot of stuff around the fact that there is one study that found that teenagers aged between 13 and 16 using social media for more than 3 hours per day had significantly higher levels of depressive symptoms, with a stronger association for girls than boys. And what this has done is that this is then transferred into a global campaign around the banning or limiting or censoring of social media for those young people.
Alex, can I just say, here's the thing that we need to pay attention when we see these headlines about these dubious studies that are almost all complete nonsense. My favorite, and I don't know if this is the one you're referring to, but a recent one that got written up all over the UK was about, the dangerous effects of social media and da-da-da. And when you dig in, and I clicked through and through and through, finally to the actual study, it was done on a few hundred teenagers using Badoo in 2012. And then, of course, all the news articles are like taking this as some like thing about TikTok and stuff. I think when we talk about any sort of science, we need to look at what is scientific consensus versus, some viral headline that you might have seen. And are there viral headlines nonstop about how evil and bad social media is and how it's making people depressed? Yes. But that is not what scientific consensus shows. We actually have thousands and thousands of hours of research done and countless publications in the top journals showing that there is actually zero causal effect between social media use and mental health. And this is for a lot of reasons. That's not to say that everybody that's using social media is using it in a healthy way, or that it's not exacerbating their negative mental health problems, but rather that social media, kind of like Chris described earlier, it's a reflection. It is sort of this tool that you can use. And can you engage in unhealthy behaviors when you're depressed? Yes. Can media consumption, can listening to a sad song when you're already depressed make things worse for you? Yes. Can you sort of like end up maybe disassociating and playing video games for 12 hours a day or reading comic books for 12 hours a day, and that can be unhealthy to your life? Yes. But to make this argument that social media is sort of causing all of this harm among children, there is actually just no scientific evidence showing that. In fact, we have endless evidence to the contrary, and youth mental health as a whole has improved the past couple years. So that contradicts which I think I love that, like Jonathan Haidt and all these other people, they never mention that. Their studies all stop in like 2021.
So I'm going to go through very, very, very quickly. So there's a 2019 finding that was 355,000 adolescents, and they found that there was less than 1% variance in well-being. So actually, they pulled out sleep deprivation, bullying, and family conflict as the key drivers of depression. There's a 2018 paper in Clinical Psychological Science that's found while increasing depressive episodes amongst US adolescents spiked 37% between 2005 and 2014, which is a study that is still cited today. They found no causational impact between it. They found correlation, but they found no causation. They wanted to try and link it, and that didn't quite work. And there's a Lancet UCL study that says that there are increased depressive symptoms only after they've used it 3 hours a day. And again, they didn't associate necessarily the link between one or the other. The only one that does is a ABCD US cohort study. Again, this is from a little while ago around young people, and it found that the direction of causation might run from social media to depression rather than just the other way around. But again, we are talking about data that is at least, in its most recent example, 3 or 4 years old, and in some cases, a decade old.
We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies that show the opposite, right? That show rather the scientific consensus on this issue. And I think of climate change because I write a lot about climate, or not as much anymore, but I used to in the 2010s write about like sort of climate denialism and how that sort of information would spread on social platforms, et cetera. You can pull out these poorly done studies, industry-funded studies. Like, there is this massive, well-funded kind of effort to villainize social media from these groups that fund a lot of, bad research. I think we just need to look at the broader landscape of it and also take a look at, okay, what are you trying to do about it? And how are these studies being used? And what they're being used for is not to argue, hey, youth mental health is a real problem, and there's actually a lot of things that we could do to improve it. We don't even have health care for children in this country, right? We could do that. We could build some parks. We could, invest in public education, all of these things. We're not doing any of that. Instead, we're going to ban social media where you want to talk about there is no scientific evidence for sort of the causal effect. There's also no scientific evidence that shows that banning social media improves kids' mental health at all.
Yeah, there is a strong argument to the opposite, right? I think this is one of the interesting things that has been sort of bundled up in this debate, and it is useful from a UK point of view to see folks like the Molly Rose Foundation, so the charity set up by the parents of Molly Russell, who killed herself after being bombarded with negative imagery on Instagram, and a UK coroner decreed that actually Meta was responsible in some way for her death there. She was attributing that to social media, and that was a decision by the coroner who had decreed that was in some way contributory to her death. They say actually an outright ban on social media is a bad idea. That this is not useful, not conducive to anything like that. There is certainly, an issue, I suppose, with some, mental health amongst young people, but the correlation versus causation thing is a big challenge, and also the fact that there are so many other elements that contribute to that right now. Like, we are living through the X number economic crisis that we've had in the last 15 years or so. Like, if you are a 16-year-old or whatever, look at what you've lived through. Like, you were born into a financial crisis. You have gone through COVID. You have gone through years of kind of recession. You have now started to have to graduate from school into a workforce where, if you're not going to university or college or whatever, where frankly everything is shot and everything is being adapted and changed by AI, you are now living through whatever the hell is going on in the Middle East right now. Like, is it a surprise that you are unhappy with your life? Like, this is the thing that I think folks don't understand, and that often gets missed out around the debate around mental health and social media, is that actually there are a whole load of confounding effects that aren't anything to do with social media. They're to do with life.
Well, I just want to say one thing about these parents groups. A lot of them are extremely well funded. Like, these parents are being flown out and put up in hotels and paraded out, and we've seen this tactic, frequently. I will note that in America, at least, the majority of these kids that have died by social media have overdosed on fentanyl. We have a huge drug crisis, opiate crisis in America that nobody is dealing with. And yes, it's tragic that they bought those drugs, sometimes over Snapchat or Instagram Messenger or WhatsApp or whatever. But that doesn't mean that we need to ban those communication tools. We need to figure out sort of why we have this drug problem. But more importantly, like, we've seen this time and time again. The exact same arguments being made about social media were made about video games, violent video games, causing kids to kill themselves, causing school shooters. When I was growing up, I was not allowed to play even Sonic the Hedgehog because my mom was like, you will become the Columbine shooter. We have mass school shootings constantly in America. Again, I know you guys don't have to worry about this in the UK, but like, video games were sort of like constantly deemed the problem. That never panned out. And music in the 80s and the 90s, music like Ozzy Osbourne and others, there was suicides directly linked to, the kid listening to this song. And listen, music, nobody's denying that music can affect your mental state. Looking at negative content can affect your mental state. Is an app like Spotify responsible for your suicide because it kept serving you, depressing songs over and over again when you were already depressed? I think this is a really dangerous road to go down.
So then if we all agree that fundamentally a lot of the messaging, if not nearly all of the messaging around mental health, is at best flawed and at worst willfully misleading, then how in this forum we have a little bit of time, easy. How can we make sure that facts win the argument? How can we create a positive message? How can we reframe the narrative, and how can we shift the way that the discussion goes around social media and all of its benefits and create a positive case? Because it feels like there are too many commercial interests shouting over each other for actually a reasoned, nuanced, sensible, warm, positive message to find its way through.
Go on, Taylor, no pressure. I'll have
You go
think.
first. I know Brits are known for being very warm and positive.
Oh, really? Have you met me? No. This is look, I think to me what will be interesting is seeing the data from Australia. And I feel like that might be, like, perhaps we are missing something. Perhaps there is actually a kind of thing that all the research that's been done so far is missing out on because it doesn't have that population level analysis. And maybe we're wrong. Fine. Okay. In which case, then we have an evidence space.
Australia, so I've spoken to some people involved in the research around previous stuff that just only happens in Australia, and they've sort of said, yes, it's really interesting, but none of it can be directly ported onto, unless it is this sort of big island, sparse population economies that don't necessarily rely on the global supply chains in the way that Central Europe or the way that UK does or the US does. It doesn't really provide a good example because Australia is such in a unique position because of its geographical place that actually it's hard to draw conclusions that make sense in other, whether either more centralized, whether that be US or UK, or the sort of more Central Europe, or even in less traditional economies.
So well, the bans are also done differently, right? Because they want to do a lot more restrictive versions of these bans than are happening in Australia, because so many kids are getting around, 70% of kids or something I saw are getting around these bans. Already you have the UK and the US saying, we want to make sure that they're way more restrictive than Australia because we see the kids getting around. That's why we want to ban VPNs. That's why we want to do all these other things. So I don't think that the laws that we would implement are even, I think that Australia is doing a light version of what they want to do in sort of the rest of the Western world.
Yeah, but I think regardless, I mean, I don't think that we will find some kind of smoking gun around this, but I'm open to being seen whether or not there is actually kind of evidence that suggests that this is beneficial for society, and suddenly all of the teenage mental health crisis that we're seeing is fixed in some way, shape or form by this. But if it's not, then I think it's a really good rejoinder to the kind of vibes-based approach that we've had so far, which is we're always saying we're looking for evidence. They are on the kind of pro-ban side grasping for stuff that doesn't work. So we can then, that number of multi-million users that you can see actually it doesn't work for. So now let's have a proper conversation. And actually that might, I think, knock back the kind of, the naysayers who think that a ban is important, and it will allow us to have, hopefully, I mean, this is the bleeding heart liberal coming through of saying that you can rationalise with folks like this with data and evidence, but maybe then you can use that as a base for a more nuanced debate, he says.
Only a couple of episodes ago, Rob Topinka was on the show saying that you can prove anything with facts, but it doesn't change the rhetoric. You don't move the Overton window there. You don't move the policy base.
Yeah, we already have endless evidence that they're ignoring. They already are ignoring full scientific consensus on this issue. I also think that you have to look at the way that they're weaponizing it already. So first of all, we had that report in The Guardian recently showing that actually the bans have been devastating for disabled people, for marginalized communities that are struggling already to get around these bans and to deal with them. So I do think that there's negative impacts that we're seeing there. But what they're arguing now is just that, the bans aren't strong enough. And that's what I mean of the VPN bans and this sort of ancillary legislation where they're already saying, well, the reason you're not going to see the result that we promised in Australia is because it wasn't strong enough. So when that data comes out and that data validates what Chris and Taylor and Alex have been saying this whole time, it's just because it wasn't strong enough. And that's going to be their argument forever. And so I also think that we should reject this idea that child safety at all is worth these trade-offs. Even if these policies did cause some sort of meaningful effect in terms of, youth mental health, we cannot look at that positive effect without acknowledging the vast downsides and specifically the concerns for civil liberties and the ways that these, identity verification laws endanger whistleblowers, immigrants, LGBTQ people, all these other groups, journalists that rely on anonymity on the internet. So yes, would it be great if, kids were 2% happier? Maybe a ban would actually accomplish that. But at what cost? At this massive, massive downside, I would argue, to society and civil rights, more broadly. So I don't think it's even worth that trade-off.
Okay, I'm going to bring you both back to the original question about a positive case. The word positive is doing a lot of work on this.
There isn't one.
So I was speaking to someone a couple of days ago, and this is kind of why this popped into my head as a whole subject, is actually it was make me a positive case for social media. I can't, and then they were like, I can't think of one. All I hear is about the bad stuff and the stuff that damages.
I can make a positive case for social media. Or I thought you meant for the laws.
Oh no! I think then first make a positive case for sort of social media and why social media is brilliant, and then secondly for a real positive case for why actually social media should be cherished and be held in that sort of and is a net force for good, or at least is this thing that has the merits that ultimately the media keeps ignoring, or that can change the narrative of the way that everyday people speak about it. Because like you were saying, Chris, it's always just those people saying, oh, it's destroyed mental health, it's destroyed capitalism, it's destroyed journalism. Well, no, destroying capitalism.
It hasn't destroyed capitalism. It's been a boon for capitalism. I think that's a problem with the internet, is honestly how warped it is by capitalism. I think the internet I do think that the internet as a whole is a democratizing force in the sense that it's leading to this more sort of decentralized information environment. Now, I think the ways that capitalism and some of these corporations have warped things, I would not say all social media is good in the sense that, like, I don't think that these companies are good actors. But I do think that effectively what you're looking at is, a tool, which is the internet, which allows people to circumvent gatekeepers. That is good and bad in certain instances. But if you want to talk about circumventing gatekeepers, I think we have seen the rise of powerful social justice movements out of the internet. We have seen, people having a greater sort of understanding of their own, gender or identity, or just being able to connect. I mean, so many young people just use it to like make friends and connect and have a really positive. They meet their spouses, they meet their best friend. They buy something that they really like. Even I hate to support sort of again that capitalistic vision of the internet, but like it can provide a lot of positive things, especially for people in remote and rural areas or people that are under. I mean, I think of the ways that the internet has democratized access to addiction treatment, where so many people are able to get treatment for AA or domestic violence help, or, there are a lot of really good things with the internet. We do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of bad stuff as well, but I think if we had a less profit-driven and internet that was less sort of controlled by a few big companies, that would be a better internet.
You can find your tribe. You can learn about the world. You can learn about something that you didn't want to learn about. You can educate yourself. You can admittedly have a lot of bad things that come alongside that, but actually it's been a net benefit purely as a journalist, right? I can contact people on the other side of the world within minutes that would have taken me hours or days in the past. I can communicate better to an audience. They can understand a little bit more about the decisions that go into how they interpret the world through the lens of journalism. They can understand and equip themselves with a better toolkit to ignore bits of that when they want to and remediate some of the biases and the issues that they encounter. Like, social media is great in many ways. I don't deny that social media is bad for lots of people, but like the more that we're on social media, the more you learn about the world and about yourself. And that includes the stuff that you want to consume and the stuff that you don't want to consume. And that is a virtue too, as well.
Have either of you heard of the singer Sophie Azella?
No, I thought you were going to say Sophie Ellis Bextor. I was very excited there. No, I have not.
Shows our relative hipsterdom, doesn't it? So I think they opened for Taylor Swift, so I think that's why they're getting mainstream attention. But one of their most famous songs is "All of Human Knowledge Has Made Us Dumb," and so their entire point is, how do we have access to everything now, and it's just made us stupid? I highly recommend that song, an incredible song. Anyway, highly recommend. Otherwise, I don't think I can make the positive case with social media because I've been so bashed over the head with all of the bad things. I made my career from social media. I've made so many friends from social media. My partner I met through Tinder, which is a form of social media. Is that a form of social? That's a form of social media.
Sure.
And there are so many good, and I believe in the power of people. The second you remove gatekeepers, the world gets better. And I think the second that you allow people a voice and the chance to be heard, the world is a much, much better place. But I think if I see one more advert for those Vans shoes that I don't want, I just think every other thing be an advert, no matter how many times I try and tweak it to be out, means that the big business is winning. And if you look at the centralization of the power, both on networks, whether that be through Meta, X or others, and of even influencers and creators on those platforms, I think the work there is to be done is to stop reinserting the gatekeepers and to stop trying to make it just like days of old on a new platform. And the work there is in making sure that it remains a democratic space, an open space for everyone to have a wonderful time, rather than it is to sell me another pair of shoes, which is sad.
I hear you.
Which
is why we need privacy laws. So they won't be able to know what kind of shoes you wear.
They're also 1/3 more expensive than they are on eBay. I don't know how TikTok got more expensive. That is a whole episode by itself. I want TikTok to be the weird place where everything is way cheaper. Anyway, Taylor, the final question is, where can people find you and where would you direct people to go read your work or contact you or drop below the line in your comments?
Yeah, watch my YouTube channel, just at Taylor Lorenz. I have a whole series on Section 230, and I cover a lot about sort of all of these things. I also write a lot on my newsletter, usermag.co, and I'm just on every social media app, Taylor Lorenz, so you can just find me and send me hate mail at any of those spots.
Taylor, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. Our final story is one that doesn't make any sense to me and is making my mind hurt, but it's about the UK Space Agency. It's providing funding for 3 in-orbit studies, including £250,000 feasibility study for BioOrbit, which is trying to design a scalable in-orbit manufacturing system to crystallize biologic drugs for cancer treatments. That is a lot of words in an order that does make grammatical sense, but Chris sent this to me last night, one of those, and it just hurt my tiny little brain, and I'm obviously not smart enough to understand what the hell is going on. Chris, what the hell is going on?
I'm not smart enough, so I don't know. We have to ask someone who is. Look, I mean, I can unpick the PR jargon from the government press release. This is literally a moonshot, and it is kind of interesting and exciting. Exactly, right. In a way that I think data centers in space are not interesting or exciting, because there has been this kind of historic implementation of science experiments on spaceships. The International Space Station, every rocket as well goes up with some sort of like living lab to see what impact doing experiments in space has. So effectively, it's an attempt to fine-tune the manufacturing process of drugs targeted at cancer, and it takes advantage of the way in which the microgravity in space operates. And I fully admit I don't completely understand this, but by my reading of it, effectively, because you don't have gravity in space, or very little gravity in space, you are able to do things like get drugs more pure, to crystallize the formation of them in a way that you can't here on Earth. And also that allows you to create sort of purer concoctions that can then be used to create higher quality, more targeted medicines to tackle major issues. And I just thought this was cool. And the reason why I sent it to you, Alex, was this is genuinely a place where we can say, actually, the UK is doing something interesting here and world leading in some way. And it's just got that weird novelty factor of being in space, and a thing that I had never thought about, but actually seems like it is interesting and relevant.
Before we get into the serious discussion about this, I want to see Tom Cruise in a Breaking Bad in space kind of like reboot for the sort of the purest drugs on the market. Anyway,
why is Tom Cruise your choice for that?
Because, firstly, he hasn't got the Mission Impossible to go to anymore, so he's at a loose end. Secondly, if I want a naff sci-fi reboot of a thing about, I don't know, I don't have a good answer for you. It's the end of the podcast. We've been recording for a long time. It feels like the sort of thing that sounds nice in a press release, but if it doesn't get picked up in mainstream publications, it quickly falls off the bottom of the things that the government can fund at the moment.
I've pitched this to 3 publications since learning about it because I think it's interesting. So maybe I can, in a bad way, play my own role in that. I'm not here to be a government.
You can be Tom Cruise.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, let's. For those of you who are watching along rather than listening along, you'll know why that is quite such a funny thing to say. But I do.
Why is that? You could be Tom Cruise.
Oh, thanks. I need a little bit of woo-woo to get me along there.
We're not going to include that sentence. I'll leave this bit in, but we're not going to include what you just said.
Just bleep it out. Bleep it out.
because of the level of lawyering. And if it was editorially important, I would leave it in and we would have that discussion. It's not editorially important. It's just going to bring lawyers.
Let me give you a broadcast safe line then. I mean, more just because I'm not a looker in the same way that Tom Cruise is, and also I wouldn't do my own stunts. I'm too scared of injuring myself.
That's the big difference. That is the thing that will kill you.
He looks like his own Madame Tussauds version of himself, which is to say that he is timeless. Good save from the jaws of lawyers. And I was saying that he's waxwork-like because of his brilliant, fascinating, luscious skin and hair.
Anyway, the final section of this podcast, which we spent the questions to which you have no answer.
If you could develop any drug in outer space, what drug would it be?
If you're going to turn down Tom Cruise on the Breaking Bad in Space remake, then I'm going to pick something really practical. So I think cancer is the biggest cause of death in ever. So let's save some people. Sorry, it's pretty dull.
I would pick whatever it is that allows me to have the same pep and verve as Tom Cruise.
Again, legally tricky ground that.
No, because I think that he's found the elixir of youth. And so I think that is like he's just, I think he has such a brilliant energy around him that
for the sake of the tape, we'll say that Chris wants to go and develop some new super vitamin D. He wants to go and develop in space vitamin D. That's what we will say. So
there you go. I'm quite tired, as you can tell.
My question is that Goldman Sachs has valued the sort of creator economy sector at roughly $250 billion in 2023 and is projected to grow to $480 billion by 2027. And 50 million people globally identify as creators. How can you make those numbers add up?
Well, I was trying to while you were explaining this. It felt like it was my GCSE maths exam, Alex, to be honest. So
this is a Linktree survey. This is not the most reputable survey, but so it's only 9,000 creators, but just over half earned less than $100. So that's £75 per year. And only 12% of creators earned more than $50,000 or £37,000 per year. It's almost like we had an entirely different section that I had notes for that we never got to because we were chatting nonsense for too long. So I've got some deeper research about stuff. If the creative industry is now mature and more money is going to the top, now that we're under the power law distribution, which I had not heard of until I was researching for this, so it means that if big growth happens at the top, those in the long tail technically get an increase, but it's not very much. Does that mean that the creator economy has just become like traditional TV media, or is there still growth in that sector?
No, it was like this all the time. I mean, it's the Mr. Beastification of the creator sector, but it was always like this and has been like this for 10 or so years. There is a reason why in 2019 I subtitled my book on YouTube of how YouTube shook up TV and created a new generation of stars, which is that it is directly in line with the lineage of reality TV, where it sells you the idea that you can go on a reality TV show, an X Factor or whatever it is, and become rich beyond your wildest dreams and incredibly popular. But actually it only happens to 1 in a million people. But because it is broadcast to so many, and because it is such an ordinary individual that does become powerful and rich and famous, you tend to believe that actually anybody can do it, when in reality they can't. Some random academic in Germany had managed to scrape effectively like a massive swathe of YouTube without anybody realizing, and had published this paper that nobody noticed that suggested that like it was something like the top 1% or 0.1% of creators accounted for 60% of views on the platform. And that kind of is mind-blowing in showing the power law, as you talked about, of how this thing is distributed. It is absolutely a game for those who are established creators. Sometimes you will find people who get incredibly lucky, and as we were talking about earlier with Taylor, the concept that actually we're sold this idea that anybody can broadcast themselves and anybody can become hugely popular. Not always the case. Like, you have to be super lucky to be able to do that, and very, very few people actually are.
I asked a question to Taylor and of you about the optimistic case for social media, and I feel like we've spent so much of this being like, yeah, it's a bit shit, to be honest. Yeah,
but so there are two different ways of approaching social media. If you approach social media as a business, as a get-rich-quick opportunity, as a kind of career path, as unfortunately many people do, it isn't an optimistic place necessarily. It's an incredibly difficult place to break into. It can be crushing to your soul in terms of the effort that you have to go to. Getting on that hamster wheel is really difficult and really just demoralizing often. But if you're just on social media because you want to interact with people, you want to make that connection, you want to reach out and learn about the world, you're a young person who wants to build up their social network in the way that you can't necessarily offline because of the removal of those third spaces. Youth clubs don't exist anymore. You're increasingly chased out of parks. You can't congregate in shopping centres because there are weird bylaws that prevent you from doing that. Then yeah, it's quite good if you're using it for its original pre-capitalism purpose. And that was, I think, what Taylor was maybe getting at, is that capitalism does kind of ruin everything here.
On that optimistic note, that is plenty plenty for today. Thank you for listening. Crashes and Everything Popular is Wrong production. Follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. The title music is from Nuffer. Check them out on all of the streamers. We're hosted by Acast, assisted by Research Studios, and we are published every Thursday morning. Get in touch with us if you want to say how great this is, if you want to argue with us about the future of the internet, or if you just want to chat about anything we have covered. You can find me at Alex Hudds on everywhere. You can follow Chris at Stokel on X, and his links are somewhere varied, but they're all on his X platform and all. And if you want to support the podcast, go to crash.substack.com or search for Crash Podcast on Substack or Google or wherever the hell you want, and we'll be back next week.